Have you ever wanted to start reading philosophy but you just didn't know where to start? Well, you're in luck, because today, as a philosophy student, I'm going to tell you the 5 books I recommend for beginners to read to get into philosophy. Now, a brief caveat before we get started into this list. I am reusing an article that I wrote on medium.com titled 5 Philosophy Books for Beginners, mainly because I think that it's useful to repurpose some of the content, and also I think the video form will prove to have a bit of added soul to it. If you'd like to see more of that kind of style, then you can see the article version. Link will be down in the description below. Anyway, let's get started. So why should you read philosophy? Well, philosophy is essentially, it's a way of life. Philosophy is the study of wisdom, it's the study of knowledge. Now, philosophy is a very broad discipline. There's epistemology, there's metaphysics, there's ethics, there's philosophy of religion, philosophy of science, philosophy of mathematics. There's a lot to unpack with respect to philosophy. Now, my main area of philosophy is ethics. Ethics is what I personally find very interesting. I also like to delve into philosophy of religion because I am a Christian, and I find that understanding arguments for and against God, it helps develop my faith. So the reason why I chose these books specifically is because that they are 1, beginner friendly, they are 2, they challenge you to think, and number 3 is because these are the books I was recommended to read whenever I first started doing philosophy, either by professors, by friends, or simply just by what I thought would be good on the internet. So the sole aim of philosophy, in my opinion, is to live and examine life. This means that we seek to understand the world and our place in it. We seek to improve ourselves where we are both the marble and we are the sculptor. Philosophy seeks truth. Whether it is subjective or objective, the objective of philosophy is truth. That's the end goal. Why do you believe something? Do you have valid reasons to believe it? And so for our first pick, Plato's Republic is the best introduction. Now, Plato is a great introduction to philosophy in the Platonic dialogue. Dialogue is a bit of a famous saying to use in philosophy. In the Republic, we have Socrates and Plato. They're seeking to answer really one question, and that question is, what is justice? What is the nature of justice? And throughout the book, we are challenged to think about the nature of law, justice, and truth. Once you finish the book, you will notice a difference in the way that you think. Now, personally, I really liked Plato's Republic. I'm still currently reading through most of Plato's other work. The Republic is, at least the way that mine is structured more like a novel in a sense, rather than how it is traditionally structured with Socrates, and then it looks more like a play traditionally how it would be written. However, I find that having it as a novel with the translation by Robin Waterfield, I found that was quite helpful, and I think that at least having it that way was good. I'm not going to give too much spoilers into the Republic because I think that you should read it for yourself and find out what it's all about. And so let's dive into number 2. My second pick would be Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle is the best teacher for anyone interested in ethics, in my opinion, because virtue ethics is the ethical theory that I personally ascribe to. But I also find that Aristotle's ethics is where a lot of other ethical discussions kind of crop up. Whether you have the Kantians or the deontologists disagreeing with Aristotle, the nature of duty and such, or if you have the utilitarians talking about what produces the most pleasure, the most happiness, or the Nietzscheans who talk about the will to power. So as someone who's personally interested in ethics and philosophy, I cannot recommend Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics enough. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle lays the groundwork for virtue ethics, and virtue ethics is the belief that actions should be done because they are intrinsically good, rather than doing them for a benefit. The famous opening lines of the Nicomachean Ethics are as follows: every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit, is thought to aim at some good. Aristotle is one of the more difficult philosophers when it comes to some of his other works. Notably, the Metaphysics is the Mount Everest when it comes to ancient Greek philosophy. However, if you wish to get a bit of a head start into ethics, I recommend that you read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Moving on to number 3 is René Descartes. Now, you might be thinking that Descartes might be a very interesting choice, but hear me out. Whenever I first took an intro to philosophy course, my professor recommended that we all read Discourse on Method. Now, there are some people who would say, why not read Aquinas, or why not read the Romans? And personally, I think that Aquinas is essentially Aristotle slightly repurposed. And the Romans are interesting, but they are essentially another branch of Greek philosophy. When you're a beginner, I think that it's very essential that you start to read the base texts, so that way you can understand the conversation of philosophy started 2,000 years ago or so. So René Descartes' Discourse on the Method and the Meditations of First Philosophy is a great starter with respect to understanding a little bit of the medieval philosophy. This is where you slowly start wading into the ocean of philosophy, and I'll be honest with you, the Discourse on the Method is a challenging read. However, it's quite approachable. Within the book, the reader is challenged with the question, how do I know I exist? And Descartes' method is one that you can question or you can agree with, but regardless, it'll leave an impression on you. Now, personally, I find that cogito ergo sum, it is convincing. However, I know that some people don't really find it a convincing argument or a convincing mode. There's a lot of criticism with respect to Descartes. However, I find that he's an interesting philosopher and certainly one that you should get acquainted with. Coming at number 4 is Nietzsche's On the Genealogy of Morals. Now, this is a bit of a heavy hitter. Nietzsche is arguably one of the most controversial philosophers on this list, mainly because Nietzsche is famous for proclaiming the death of God. For those who want to understand our favorite nihilist, On the Genealogy of Morals is arguably one of the more easier and more approachable works of Nietzsche's for the layman. Most people would recommend that you start off with Beyond Good and Evil or The Birth of Tragedy, and there are some people who say that you should start with Thus Spoke Zarathustra. However, I disagree with all those. My first Nietzsche was Beyond Good and Evil, and I didn't necessarily fully understand why he came to the conclusion that he did with morality. However, on the Genealogy of Morals, I actually started to understand why Nietzsche formulated his ethical theory or his understanding of morality. And essentially within the book, Nietzsche criticizes the history of morality and lays out a more reconstructed version of it and how Christianity weakened the Western morality and how we can resurface that. Essentially, it is a controversial book in a lot of ways. However, I think that it is a vital book to read, and I also think that Nietzsche would appreciate you if you read it. Again, he lays the whole moral framework of philosophy, and it's twisted, and he gives a remedy to the problem. This book is a fun challenge, as it's thought-provoking and unnerving. I don't recommend it as your first philosophy book. I definitely think that, given the list I've given you so far, it will give you a bit of an idea of how Nietzsche came to that conclusion. And finally, as of time of recording, and also at time that I wrote this, I'm still going through A.C. Grayling's The History of Philosophy. Now, A.C. Grayling is a notable philosopher, and I think that this book, I strongly recommend this book simply because it is a lot easier to understand the history of philosophy using Grayling rather than using someone as Peter Adamson with his History of Philosophy with No Gaps, or Copleston's 9-volume series. Copleston's 9-volume series on the history of philosophy. That one's a heavy hitter. And the interesting thing about Grayling is that he also talks about the history of Eastern philosophy, which you don't typically see in a lot of Western philosophy classes, namely in the classes I've taken. Very rarely do we ever talk about Islamic philosophy or Buddhist philosophy or anything like that. So Grayling is a great starter there. This is a digestible book, and it is a bit of a thick tome. I don't know if you can tell how thick that is. And I would recommend it over Copleston's right now. Now, if you're a bit more of a seasoned philosophy student, I would say, or someone who's interested in philosophy, if you're a bit more seasoned, I would recommend Copleston's tome because a lot of philosophy professors recommend Copleston. So in conclusion, these are the books that I would recommend you read if you want to dive into the world of philosophy. I warmly welcome you into this club because philosophy it's a misunderstood discipline, and I get a lot of flack being a philosophy student in university. A lot of people are always ask me, what are you going to do with a philosophy degree? Well, quite frankly, the things that you can do with philosophy is quite numerous. You can become a writer, you can work in businesses, you can go to law school, you can go to medical school, you can do whatever you want because philosophy teaches you 3 essential things. It teaches you how to write effectively, how to think clearly, and how to approach arguments from both sides. And that is important. And now I'm going to give you some tips on reading these. So these are my tips for reading philosophy real quick. I might make another video just separate on this. So my 4 tips for reading these books are to reread passages because rereading is crucial to philosophy. Number 2 is take notes, whether you're taking notes in the margins, whether you're taking notes in a notebook or whatever. Take notes, it will help you. Number 3 is to learn to agree or disagree with a philosopher. Now, if a philosopher says a specific statement, let it marinate. Do you agree or do you disagree? If you read a statement and you immediately just get a sour feeling in your mouth, why do you disagree with it? And I think that having kind of chewing on that and really thinking about it, it helps you to see things from another perspective. And number 4, and this is the most important part, is ask questions. If you don't fully understand something, write it down as a question and do some research on it. Because ultimately that's the point of philosophy, is that you find questions and you can try to seek answers to it. Some questions are never meant to be answered, but what do I know? I'm just a philosophy student. If you'd like any more tips or an analysis of any of these books, Feel free to comment down below if you want to see more content like this. Be sure to click the video that's going to pop up. Feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and I will see you guys very, very soon. Remember to always read deeply.